When I told people I was moving to the Philippines by myself, most of them didn't say anything at first. They just looked at me with that particular expression people get when they're trying to figure out if you're joking. Then the questions came. Not supportive questions, diagnostic questions, the kind you ask someone when you're gently trying to determine whether they've lost their mind. Are you going with someone? No. Do you know anyone there? No. Have you ever been to Southeast Asia? No. Do you have a plan? I have a ticket. That wasn't the answer they were looking for, and if I'm being completely honest, it wasn't the answer I was looking for either. I was 62 years old, I had never been married, I had no children. I had spent 28 years working as a medical records clerk at a VA hospital in Portland, Oregon, which is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds, and I had retired 6 months earlier into a life that was quiet in a way I hadn't expected and didn't enjoy. I had a small apartment, I had a cat who tolerated me, I had a routine that I could do with my eyes closed and increasingly felt like I was doing with my eyes closed. And one evening, sitting on my couch watching the rain do what rain does in Portland, which is everything, I found a video about a small city in the Philippines called Dumaguete, and something inside me leaned forward for the first time in a very long time. It wasn't the beaches. I'm not really a beach person. Honestly, I burn if I look at a photograph of the sun for too long. It was the pace. The video showed a woman, roughly my age, walking through a morning market, buying fruit, talking to vendors who knew her name, sitting at a small table with coffee watching people go by. There was nothing extraordinary about it. That was what made it extraordinary. She looked unhurried. She looked present. She looked like someone whose day belonged to her. I had never in my adult life felt like my day belonged to me. For 28 years it belonged to the VA. Then it belonged to a retirement that felt less like freedom and more like unemployment with a nicer name. I watched another video, then another. 3 months later, I was standing at the airport with 2 suitcases and a carry-on, and the distinct sensation that I had either made the bravest decision of my life or the most irresponsible one and wouldn't know which for quite some time. The first indication that this was not a vacation happened before I left the ground. The airline agent at the counter asked for proof of onward travel. My stomach dropped so fast I'm surprised it didn't land on the floor. I knew the Philippines required it. I'd read about it. But standing there with my passport in my hand and a line of people behind me, every piece of information I'd carefully researched over 3 months vanished from my brain like someone had pulled a plug. I fumbled through my phone and found the confirmation for the flexible return ticket I'd bought specifically for this moment. She looked at it, nodded, handed my passport back. You're all set. I walked to the gate on legs that were doing a reasonable impression of functioning and sat down and thought, this is actually happening. The excitement I had felt for months was being quietly replaced by something else entirely. Nerves. The kind that settle into your stomach and set up permanent residence. The flight was endless. 15 hours that felt like 40. I watched 3 movies without absorbing a single scene. I looked out the window at the ocean below and kept asking myself the same question on a loop. What if I've made a mistake? What if everyone was right? What if I land in a country where I know no one and discover that the woman on that video was just a woman on a video and my life is not going to look like that at all? When the plane landed in Manila, the heat was the first thing. Not heat the way Portland understands heat, which is 2 weeks in August when everyone acts like civilization is ending. This was different. This was physical. It pressed against you. It had weight. I walked out of the airport and immediately understood that I would be sweating for the foreseeable future and that my relationship with my hair was about to become adversarial. The second thing was the noise. Not bad noise, just constant noise. Horns, engines, music from somewhere, voices, movement in every direction. Portland is a quiet city. People speak softly and apologize for things that don't require apology. Manila at midnight was the opposite of that in every possible way. I didn't stay in Manila. I'd already booked a flight to Dumaguete for the following morning because I'd done enough research to know that Manila and I were not going to be compatible on a long-term basis. Some people thrive in cities of 14 million. I am not one of those people. I am a woman who worked in a filing room for 28 years, and I need my surroundings to reflect a certain level of quiet, organizational energy. The flight to Dumaguete was short. The airport was small. The taxi driver who took me to my hotel said, "Welcome, ma'am," in a way that sounded like he meant it, and not like he was reading from a script. The hotel was simple. Clean room, working air conditioning, which I had been told to confirm before booking, and which turned out to be the best piece of advice I received from the internet in my entire life. A ceiling fan, A window that looked out onto a street where a rooster was expressing a strong opinion about something at a volume that suggested he believed the entire neighborhood needed to hear it. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall and felt every mile of the distance between me and everything familiar. Not sad, just aware. Very, very aware. That first evening, I almost looked at flights home. I didn't actually open the website, but I thought about it hard enough that the difference was mostly theoretical. I made a deal with myself. 1 week. Stay 1 week. If after 7 days I still felt like I'd made a terrible mistake, I'd go home and tell everyone I tried, and that would be enough. It was a small bargain with myself, a tiny negotiation, and it turned out to be the most important promise I ever kept. The next morning I woke up before the sun because 28 years of 6 a.m. alarm clocks had installed a setting in my body that retirement could not override. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then I heard it. Not the rooster, although he was also awake and still had opinions. The street. Tricycles buzzing past, someone sweeping, a vendor setting up, voices, not loud, just alive. I put on walking shoes and went outside with no destination and no plan because the hotel room was beginning to feel like a container for my anxiety and I needed air. Almost immediately I noticed something. People looked at me, not in a suspicious way, in an acknowledging way. A woman carrying a basket of bread nodded and said good morning. A security guard outside a building smiled. A child walking with her grandmother stared at me with open curiosity and then waved. Back in Portland, I could walk 6 blocks without making eye contact with another human being. Not because people were unfriendly, because that was the culture. Everyone in their own lane, everyone moving through the same space without actually sharing it. Here, within 20 minutes, 3 strangers had acknowledged that I existed. That sounds like a small thing. When you've spent 3 years feeling invisible in your own retirement, it's not small at all. I found the public market almost by accident, the palenque. It was still early, and the vendors were still arranging their stalls. Piles of tomatoes, bundles of greens I couldn't name, fish that still looked like they had somewhere to be, mangoes that smelled the way mangoes are supposed to smell but never do in the produce section of a Fred Meyer in Portland. I walked through that market 3 times, not because I needed anything, because I was fascinated. A woman selling vegetables saw me circling and called me over. She held up something green and leafy and said, "For you, good for soup." I didn't know what it was. I bought it anyway. The entire bag cost less than a coffee at the shop near my old apartment. Walking back to the hotel with that plastic bag of mystery vegetables, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Proud. Not proud of anything impressive. Proud that I had gone to a market in a foreign country by myself and bought something and communicated with a woman whose language I didn't speak and figured it out. At 62, buying vegetables shouldn't feel like an accomplishment, but it did, and I needed it to. Over the next few days, something started to shift. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers. Each morning I walked a little farther. I learned a few more streets. I figured out that the tricycle drivers would take me almost anywhere for 15 pesos if I asked correctly, and 50 pesos if I looked confused, so I practiced looking less confused. I discovered that the middle of the day was for staying indoors because the sun between noon and 3 was not a suggestion, it was a threat. I found a small cafe near the boulevard where a woman named Ade Nene started preparing my coffee when she saw me approaching, which happened after approximately 4 visits. 4 visits, and she knew my order. At my regular coffee shop in Portland, it took 3 years, and they still spelled my name wrong on the cup. I noticed the pace. I noticed it the way you notice a sound has stopped. Everything was slower, not inefficient, just unhurried. People sat, people talked, families ate meals together without anyone checking their phone every 30 seconds. I'd watch a group of men playing chess on the seawall in the evening with the calm of people who had absolutely nowhere else to be and no interest in being anywhere else. At first, the slowness frustrated me. I'd spent 28 years operating on institutional time, where everything had a deadline and a filing code and a sense of urgency that was usually artificial but felt real. Here, nothing moved at that speed. Errands that would take 10 minutes in Portland took an hour. A simple task could become an entire afternoon. And then one day, sitting in the cafe with my coffee, watching the boulevard fill up with families and students and vendors grilling something on sticks that smelled extraordinary, I realized I wasn't frustrated anymore. I was breathing. Actually breathing, not the automatic kind your body does to keep you alive, the kind you do when something inside you loosens for the first time in years. Not everything was easy. I need to say that because if I don't, the rest of the story sounds like a tourism advertisement, and this isn't one of those. There were lonely moments, not all the time, not even most of the time, but specific moments that arrived without warning and sat heavily in my chest. An evening on the boulevard, watching 3-generation families walk together and realizing I had no one to call who would understand what I was looking at. A Sunday morning, when I missed my cat, which is a ridiculous thing to miss when you've moved across the world, but he was the only living thing that was consistently happy to see me, and I'd given him to my neighbor, and I missed his weight on my lap. A night when the power went out and I sat in the dark and thought about how if something happened to me, nobody in this city would know for at least a day. People asked about dating. They always ask about dating. Online, in person, the same question delivered with varying levels of subtlety. Are you looking for someone? The honest answer is no. I didn't come here looking for a man. I'd been single for years and I was comfortable with it. Most of the expat stories involve men coming here and finding relationships. My story involved finding a fruit vendor who saved me the good mangoes without being asked. If that's a relationship, then yes, I found one, and it's the healthiest one I've ever had. What surprised me wasn't romance, it was competence. Every week, there was a new problem to solve. Figuring out how to pay a bill when the office was closed, finding a pharmacy that carried my medication, learning which jeepney route went where, navigating a government office for my visa extension, which involved paperwork, patience, and the spiritual endurance of someone who has waited at the DMV for 6 hours and lived to tell about it. There were mistakes, there were wrong turns. There were moments where I stood on a street corner having absolutely no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there and felt the specific embarrassment of a grown woman who cannot find her way home. But every time I solved something on my own, the confidence built. And I started realizing something I hadn't understood about myself. For years I had been putting limits on things without noticing. Certain adventures were for younger people. Starting over was for younger people. Moving across the world by yourself was for younger people. And at some point, I had accepted those limits as facts rather than recognizing them as fears dressed up in reasonable clothing. A few months in, I had a morning that probably wouldn't mean much to anyone else. I woke up with a problem, a minor health thing, nothing serious, but the kind of thing that needed a doctor. A year earlier, that situation would have sent me into a spiral. Who do I call? Where do I go? What if they don't understand me? What if I can't explain what's wrong? Instead, I got dressed, asked Ate Nene at the cafe if she knew a good clinic. She gave me directions and told me to tell the doctor that Nene sent me, which I suspect had no medical significance, but felt like a credential, and I went and I handled it. The consultation cost 500 pesos. That's about $9. The doctor spent 30 minutes with me, gave me her phone number in case anything changed, and told me to drink more water and worry less, which is advice I have received from every medical professional in 2 countries and have yet to follow. Sitting outside afterward, I realized that the problem didn't matter. What mattered was that I hadn't panicked. A year ago, I would have. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed I was capable of navigating a medical situation in a foreign country by myself. But I had, and that's what this whole thing had really been about. Not the Philippines, not retirement, not fresh mangoes and $9 doctor visits and coffee that Ate Nene had ready before I sat down. It was about finding out at 62 years old that I was still capable of adapting, capable of learning, capable of being uncomfortable and surviving it, capable of being alone without it meaning I was finished. For years, I had quietly started believing that my interesting years were behind me, that the story was mostly written and the remaining pages were just maintenance. Keep the apartment, feed the cat, watch the rain, wait. Moving to the Philippines didn't give me a new life. It gave me evidence that I could still build one. And at 62, after 28 years of filing medical records in a windowless room, evidence like that is worth more than I know how to say. People ask me if this was the best decision I ever made. I don't think that's the right question. Every big decision has trade-offs. I miss things about home, I miss my friends, I miss my neighbor who took my cat and sends me photos of him sleeping in positions that suggest he has fully adjusted to his new life and doesn't miss me at all. I miss autumn. I miss the particular quality of Portland rain, which I never thought I'd say, but distance does strange things to your memory. The Philippines isn't perfect, the heat is relentless, the power goes out, the roosters operate on a schedule known only to God, and they are not interested in sharing it. The bureaucracy tests your patience in ways that should qualify as a spiritual practice. But if someone asks me whether I regret getting on that plane, the answer is simple, not for a second. Because somewhere between the nervous woman sitting at that airport gate, convinced she'd made a terrible mistake, and the person I am now, the one who buys mystery vegetables from a woman at the market and navigates medical clinics by herself and has coffee waiting for her every morning at a cafe where they know her name, somewhere between those 2 versions of me, I found something I wasn't looking for. Not a country, not a retirement plan. Confidence. Not the kind that comes from knowing what's going to happen. The kind that comes from knowing I'll figure it out. And at 62, alone, 8,000 miles from home, that might be the greatest surprise of all. If this story meant something to you, if you're sitting somewhere right now wondering whether it's too late to do the thing you've been thinking about, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. I'm going to keep telling these stories, the real ones, the ones where the answer isn't perfect, but it's honest. And if you know a woman who needs to hear that the interesting years aren't over yet, send this to her. Sometimes the thing that changes everything is just knowing someone else went first.